and welcome to my talk. My name is Tobias. I'm a third teacher, and for the past year or so, I've been doing a bit of research on what it means to be masculine as as a male society, and how that affects our teenage boys. And this is because I became the boys' progress leader for year 11 for the past year at school. So I thought this was quite a pertinent thing to talk about now that I've completed a fair bit of research. I hope everyone is feeling safe in this quarantine and in this difficult time, and I really hope that it's over soon. I mean, we have access to technology, we can talk about things along the internet. You can find me at Dready Teachers on Twitter. Into it, shall we? So, masculinity and teenage boys. So today's what I'm going to be talking about today. We are it's going to be, what does it mean to be masculine? I'm going to be using a few friends to kind of illustrate what it means to be masculine in the world today. And they thought what it was like as a teenager. So it'll be interesting to have a look at that. A historical look at the roots of modern masculinity too. Excuse me. We're going to look at how masculinity has a destructive nature, and we're also going to have a look at how masculinity is portrayed in the classroom today, and what we can do for our young males, including our transgender friends too, and with regards to how to portray our masculinity in a more productive way. So, attitudes towards masculinity as teens, as told by some men. So in this case, what I did was I kind of just put a question in our group chat. Our group chat is called Brethren of Old, and I put a question in there that's called that was, so guys, what did it mean to you to be masculine as a teenager? So pause the video. I'd like to have a read of what Azar had to say about that. What I can pull from what Azar had written here was that physical prowess was a huge thing growing up as a teenager, and as a male, and it meant to be a male and to be masculine. So as a masculine male in school, he felt that he had to be stronger than others. And he wasn't able to have conversations or listen. He was just being stronger, have fights, have arguments. Exerting dominance essentially. It was the only way he felt he could be. He could be as a male and man. It's quite a sad way to portray way to be masculine. You have a look at Lee now. So Lee is an interesting one because he's ethnic, he's black. Essentially, he's an interesting one because we don't always get to have a look at what it means to be a male and masculine in a different culture. Please do pause the video and have a read of what Lee has to say. So Lee again has as another one. He's saying that physical prowess is a huge thing for him. He was portrayed to be, somebody who's quite powerful because he's an ethnic male. He's quite strong. He was able to run around. He's recreational time to be an athlete. And because he had to portray this particular type of person, that's what it meant to him. He had to be a masculine male as an ethnic male. He had to be this person who was naturally gifted, or just gifted at sport. I'm just going to move him out of the way so you can. So here's my friend Courtney. Please do pause the video and have a read of what my friend Courtney has to say. So what I got from Courtney is that he didn't feel confident at school because he didn't feel like he was part of the appropriate hierarchy. He wanted to be part of the hierarchy, but to be part of the hierarchy, he had to be higher in the hierarchy. So there was a pecking order, and if you had to be the most confident. He wasn't the most confident. He wanted to be like them, but he was never going to be like them. He didn't feel like he was going to be like them. So to be in the case for him, being masculine, being part of a hierarchy and being top of that hierarchy. And here's Johnny. So please do pause the video, have a read of what Johnny has to say. So he is an interesting one because he used sport again as a as a medium to kind of express his views. And in this case, we're talking about quite masculine men, stereotypically masculine men, Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira. And he felt that they taught him to not cry or any weakness. In his stoicism, that and now if to be a male, to be masculine, he had to be stoic. He couldn't show any pain. He couldn't show any discomfort. He had to be this man who was always ready, and it didn't matter how he felt. So for these four different chats that we had, pulled these themes out. So the themes being physical toughness and strength, that's what it kind of meant to all four of them, what it meant to be a man, okay? Male. And living up to a portrayed image, being a masculine man, you have to be this masculine man, and to be able to be a masculine man, there's your portrayed image. You have to be part of this hierarchy. You have to be physically strong, stoic. There's a hierarchy involved. You have to be part of the top of the hierarchy to be considered masculine. Stoicism, you can't show weakness as a masculine man. You can't do it. What I also like to make sure that it's pertinent to say is that masculinity is inherently being a man. So if you have these themes going up, and you feel these sort of themes, you also always sort of felt threatened. You didn't feel like a male, you didn't feel masculine, and that's a really sad state of things, because these traits, we don't need them anymore. Okay, let's move on. So that's where things come from. These themes come from. And it's this term called hegemonic masculinity, and it comes from a researcher called R.W. She's an Australian researcher, and she's about masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity is a characteristic typify being. You have to be aggressive, you have to be violent, you have to be athletic. And if you have a look at what the inferences that we can make from our culture as a Western culture, where do they come from? They come from people like this over here. We've got John Rambo over here. We've got John Wayne over here. Two very important men when it comes to culture, and what it meant to be a male. Both when the movies came out and what it meant in that particular culture at the time. It literally typified what that culture was. So look at John Rambo here. He's very violent. He had guns. He had knives. He was he was stoic. He did things on his own, independent, very strong, athletic. And the same thing with John Wayne. Very strong, very stoic, independent. He liked control a lot, John Wayne. A lot of control. And it's aimed that men feel that they need to live up to this particular standard of man, because it's as Connell said, it can be quite destructive to the male psyche, essentially. And we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail later on. So, moving on. I'd like to talk a little bit further about where these ideals come from as men, and how they infiltrated our culture in the West and were passed down from generation to generation, essentially. And I did a bit of reading on Mr. Morel here. And Morel, he coined a paper to do with South Africa, and I'm going to just use it as essentially a case study how these masculine ideals penetrated a particular culture and then were passed down for years and years and years of passed down and conditioning, essentially. So the traits came from the British, essentially, in this case. In all cases, but in this case it came from the British. The British came, they colonised South Africa and the NATO region specifically around 1843. So it was a long time ago. They colonized it. They went on their crusades around the world trying to colonize more people, and it was a quite brutal time, for people that weren't Western, and they had to re-establish new norms. But also, they had to re-establish new norms. They're in a situation where the British elites were also there trying to establish their own laws. So when the British came into South Africa, in particular the NATO region, they felt that they didn't have access to good schools to be able to rear essentially their upper class boys who were potentially going to be leaders of society at one stage. But in this case, they decided they were going to build more schools, It makes complete sense. They want to make sure that they've got their school, their upper class boys being educated well, shall we say. So in this case, they sent over British teachers who were trying to be able to teach these boys how to be men, and the British values of how to be a man at that particular time, because it wasn't always the same, but at that particular time, how to be a man was that, you had to be hegemonically masculine. You had to be violent. You had to be aggressive. You had to be independent, a leader, stoic, and that was all to do with being able to go out and crusade and take over the world. So in this case, they came over to teach them over. They came in and they took boys and tried to start to mold them into what it meant to be a man. And in these schools, there was quite a lot of brutality. It was the boys ashamed if they showed things that weren't particularly stereotypically under British ruling masculine. If they felt weak in any way, they weren't allowed to show it. They were beaten for showing weakness. And in this case, they used to take it with God. So God, if they didn't behave the correct way to God, then they deserved to be punished for that. They were considered weaker. In this case, they took further down the line to coin this term called muscular Christianity. And I'd like to share with you what it meant to be, muscular Christianity means a definition. And it is a patriotic duty, self-sacrifice, malice, and the beauty of physical prowess. So for these boys, they weren't particularly they didn't have physical prowess. They weren't strongest, and they didn't feel they made the right sacrifices, and they were conditioned to be able to do this. This is who you are as a man. You have to be able to run, jump, swim. You have to be able to manage your emotions. You're supposed to, you can't talk to people because you're a leader. You're an independent man. And this sort of muscular Christianity came from the fact that they had to be physically strong. And that in that physical strength became this mental strength under what it meant by God. Okay? Which is, again, that's the first we think about it. Now, this was essentially, conditioned and passed on the years. We come to further down the line, and I'd like to just make a pause at where it was post-apartheid. So we had the leaders of the society beforehand, from the colonists, the colonizers, and the imperialists, that came with this notion of masculinity, and then they came into South Africa and brought their masculinity around. So we've got a lot of very manly, masculine men in South Africa now, and then we come to post-apartheid now, and there's been wars, there's been conflict about from the rebels to the whites, and post-apartheid they just wanted to unify. They wanted to unify underneath one South Africa. Everybody pertains to these particular values. These values are, in this case, unfortunately, what it meant to be masculine again. And I'm a big fan of Nelson Mandela, but Nelson Mandela also has his critics. Remember, we also forget that Nelson Mandela spent a long time in prison. So he was very stoic. He did that whole stint in prison without complaining. He didn't feel, he wasn't supported in that way. So he was very stoic. He was independent. He was a leader, but he also used violence in some senses as well before he went to prison. So he also embodied the hegemonic masculinity ideals too. Under this particular ideal, it meant that we needed to socialize and conceptualize what it meant to be South African. And what it meant to be South African was these things. And to be successful in these things, you had to embody masculinity in order to be able to succeed and gather resources. Because we're now talking about an age where we're talking in the 90s, where everybody under capitalism is trying to have the most resources they can to live a most comfortable life as they can. So under the fact that we're being in a more capitalist society, as well as a more a more masculine society where competition is key, it is then found out that hegemonic masculinity was then presented in a slightly different way, because women then had to embody what it meant to be, to be successful as a South African. And to be successful as a South African, it meant having the resources, which also meant having to embody masculine traits and subordinate essentially what it meant to be feminine. So to be successful in assimilation, we have to talk about in South Africa at the time that masculinity and capitalism came together, and it helped subordinate anything that wasn't hegemonically masculine. So we're talking about a group of people who have now been conditioned to believe that this is the only way to live. We have to embody these things to be able to survive, because this is what capitalism is. So what I'd like to see is just case in point here. So we've got three very different leaders of society, but also under the same sort of hegemonically masculine era, essentially. So we talk about Donald Trump. Again, my button is bigger than his button. So he's talking about in reference to his nuclear weapons. My gun is bigger than your gun, essentially. I'm more violent than you. I'm more aggressive than you. I'm more of a man than you. I'm more masculine than you are. There's the competition element of hegemonic masculinity. There's the violence element of hegemonic masculinity. Here we go again. So in the recent protests, the Black Lives Matter protests, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So again, we're talking about guns, masculinity. My gun is bigger than yours. You can't do this. I'm going to exert my dominance over you because I'm more masculine over you. Same thing happened over here with Rodrigo Duterte. I think that's how to pronounce his name. Please, I do apologize if I pronounced it incorrectly. But we'll shoot them in the vagina. If there's no vagina, it will be useless. Again, the subordination of anything feminine, or anything that's not considered masculine, to further the masculine agenda in this case. We've got Jordan Peterson over here. He's an interesting one because he's very, very recent and he's very modern. So he has a YouTube account that has a huge following, and it's very interesting because he says things that are quite inflammatory. He doesn't like feminists at all. He wants to further the masculine agenda. He believes that that the masculine is the only way to live life as a man. So in this case, in reference to an incel called Alec Manassian, he was angry at God because women were rejecting him. So again, we're talking about the blame of women, the blame of something that isn't hegemonically masculine, as an excuse to kill 12 people. An incel, I thought I'd just define this for everybody. An incel is somebody who, it's an internet term that's now worked its way into popular culture, but it means that it's involuntary celibate. So involuntary celibate Alec Manassian killed 12 people. Essentially, he was a young man who felt that he wasn't masculine enough because he wasn't able to sleep with women in the same way that other more masculine men were able to. So in this case, he felt like his masculinity was so threatened that he decided to become violent, and he killed 12 people. Jordan Peterson also goes on to say that no one cares about men who fail. And this is in reference to celibate and childless men. So not only are these men already feeling under the term hegemonic masculinity and what it means to be masculine in the current society, they're also feeling emasculated. But he's also told them that nobody cares. So if you're already somebody who feels like you need to be stoic, you have to be able to show any feeling, being told that no one cares about you will also just launch you further into the idea of being stoic and being and self-reliant. You can't speak to anybody because no one cares anyway, and this is where the mental health issues can arise. And when you come to these people, and you look at them, they're leaders of society, they're hegemonically masculine. Men look up to them, and they want to be like them. In a sense, I want to exert my dominance as a man. And when they can't accept their dominance as a man, sometimes it means they're emasculated and they don't feel masculine enough. And in some cases, this means, like Alec Manassian, they go out and assert their masculinity by killing people, and that's in the most extreme case. Or in another way, they may decide to feel that they're inadequate and they don't feel like they're masculine enough. So that also leads to the mental health issues, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. So when we talk about people, men at the moment, there's a big conversation about suicide and how men react to certain things, and in this case, we're talking about the Western socialization of men and how that can pertain to suicide and how it can cause people to take their own lives. Essentially, um, we live in a society where hegemonic, like I said before, hegemonic masculinity is king. It's an attitude that we have. Men need to be males. They need to be manly. They need to provide. They need to be. They need to show aggression. They need to be successful. And if men don't feel that they are, then it can contribute to the ways in which that men commit suicide. And I'm not saying that women don't commit suicide and feel badly about things when they have mental health issues, but the way that men commit suicide has been shown to be completely different to how women commit suicide. And as men, it tends to be because they don't want to be seen as feminine, okay, or emasculated. They want to do, if they're going to commit suicide, they have to commit suicide in the most masculine way possible, and that is with intent and to be successful at it. Because if they're successful, it asserts their masculinity. You know, I'd like to just have a look at another study here by King and colleagues, and it's into conformity and suicide. So when they conform, when we're talking about people, this was an Australian study, by the way, and they took into account young boys that were, for a long period of time, young boys who were in particular areas, as well as Aboriginal boys too. Um, they spoke about this conformity questionnaire, and the conformity questionnaire was talking about how people conform to particular masculine norms, and these are the norms here that were logged inside of the inventory. Essentially, they repurposed the word here just to make it more essentially to make sure that they weren't biasing somebody with it. So they changed the wording of this one here. Um, and they also looked at the roof risk behavior questionnaire, which asked questions to do with suicide and whether they've had suicidal thoughts and things like that. So um, again, 829 boys over a long period of time. So it was young boys to young men essentially, and they looked at an odds ratio. So the odds ratio looks at around one. If you're looking at one, you're looking at the population level, and an odds ratio is essentially what two variables are, okay, together, and the likelihood of those two variables causing a particular outcome. And if you're below that particular level, then the likelihood is less, and if the you're above that particular one, then the likelihood is more. So if we look at heterosexual presentation, so somebody who presents as a heterosexual male, we're below that one. So the one meaning we're at that population, we're leveling that population. There is a 20% lower odds of having suicidal thoughts if you present heterosexually. So essentially, one of the things that we as educators need to look at is how we can essentially help people who present as homosexual, because if they're having suicidal thoughts because they feel homosexual, then it's something we have an obligation to help with. It's not a we need to help these young boys. Another one, self-reliance. Now this is one of the above the ones. So we're talking about 40%, about 40% the odds of suicidal thoughts here in this case. So the odds of this of somebody who highly conforms to self-reliance, they have in this case, I think it was the highest the highest score and odds ratio to having suicidal thoughts. You know, so we're talking about the boys that are quiet in the back of the classroom that don't really say anything, that don't really ask for help. We need to be sure we're aware of supporting these boys. So again, we're looking at violence now. 23%, the odds ratio is 23%. So we're looking at people who conform to violence and sorting things through violence, and you know they're more likely to be able to have thoughts of society, suicidal thoughts as well. Apologies. So if we have a look back at the adjusted results over here, what the adjusted results meant in this particular study was that that they included in this case the Aboriginal boys, because this was an Australian study. It had one where it had a results table that didn't include the Aboriginal culture, And then the next one with the adjusted results included those boys that came from the Aboriginal culture. Why is it important? So the most common cause for death in males aged between 20 and 49 in the UK was suicide. So, we need to be careful about how men portray themselves and how men live in the society that we're in. We need to make sure be aware of how men feel and how their mental capacity is for to be able to deal with life. There's a 21% rise in death by suicide. If we have a look at this graph, that's in the US, and we can tell that it's not just the UK's issue. It is, and we've had a look at data from Australia, then we know that this isn't just a UK issue, this is a global issue. So by death by 100,000 teens, 15 to 19 years of age, young men, we're looking at a sharp increase. Females are committing suicide too, they are, but nowhere near the same rate as men are. So this is a thing that we need to be sure that we're supporting men through. I feel like as educators, what we need to do is we need to be able to open ourselves up and have open, honest conversations with our young men. Because if we're not having these open, honest conversations with them, they tend to ascribe to what is considered, I have to be this, I have to be that. And if they're not that, it's a contributor. It's a contributor to them committing suicide, and it's not a great thing. We also need to think about as well that we're currently in the age of information. So we don't necessarily have the same volume of industrial jobs that we had before. So what our fathers were doing when they were our age, we're not doing that anymore as young men. Then men aren't doing that. They don't have those jobs out there. So we're finding that boys, young boys from teenagers to young men, they don't necessarily have the same outlook. They're being told that they need to go and look for a job and provide, but they can't find a job because these jobs aren't available to them. And we need to be sure that we need to be able to educate them and say that it's not an emasculating thing. It's just that the skill set that they require to go and do these things is now slightly different. So that moves us on to what masculinity is in schools today, essentially. The school that I'm in, I'm currently the boys leader for progress, and I had a lot of conversations with these boys, and we really did discuss and talk through a lot of things, and it was really interesting to figure out how they saw the world. So what I'd like to talk about is ego, essentially, and this is in the Boys Don't Try book. I've got it right here. Boys Don't Try. And it's that boys like to show their masculinity off, essentially, and it's ego. It's all based on ego. Look, I'm big and I'm masculine. I'm the most masculine man in this classroom. And when they don't show that particular dominance, they're not able to show their particular dominance. That tends to be when those problems arise. If I'm not the biggest and baddest in the classroom, I'm not the one that's the most popular, I'm not the one that's going to be causing the teacher the most problems, then that's when they start to think, oh, hang on a second, I need to do more. Or they need to do less in some cases. So in some cases, this manifests as avoidance. So sometimes they think to themselves, well, I'm finding this a bit difficult. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything at all. And then it's easier because then if I haven't tried, then I haven't failed. You know, and it's a shame. I'm pretty sure everyone's had this conversation with a young boy in class over their career. It is such a shame because these boys they want to try, they want to do good, but they don't. They feel scared to try and do good because they feel like if they get it wrong, they feel emasculated, and that emasculation is quite a big threat to them. So sometimes in that case, then it also manifests as hypermasculinity. And this hypermasculinity sometimes can be loud, it can be obnoxious behavior. And again, it's just a defense mechanism. In some cases, it's just a defense mechanism. I'm not saying that we should be absolving these boys of responsibility. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that this is how it presents. This is what happens when boys feel emasculated, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't. And this is because what we could term hegemonic masculinity and how people in the world determine what it means to be a masculine man, they just tend to show out, because in this case, in this particular realm of where I am, I'm not the biggest and baddest person. For example, I have a student that doesn't particularly like science at all. I'm a science teacher. We had some long, nice conversations about what it meant to be, to be a scientist, not just I'm a man and this is what I need to do as a man, just as a scientist, And he started to learn and felt that he was able to learn. We need to be able to speak to our boys and say that, okay, you're a success in PE, fantastic. You can assert your hegemonic masculinity in your PE lessons. You're fantastic at sport, yeah. So you are the biggest, the baddest person. You're the most independent. You're the most dominant. Fantastic. But when you move into the science classroom and you're no longer that person, you cannot show your hegemonic masculinity in the same way. You need to be able to portray your masculinity in a different way, because there's some people in the classroom that are very good at science, so therefore they will show their hegemonic masculinity in a certain way, and then that's when they start to have clashes, and that's when you start to have arguments in the classroom, you know. And again, I'm not absolving them of any way. If they start to behave incorrectly, please do punish them. Please do punish them, because when they do, and you have these conversations with them and you understand where their frustrations are coming from and why they're showing out in this way, and explain that to them, that's when real change can happen. So what can we do as teachers and educators? So we can look at focus groups. I started one this year, and it works quite well. I targeted for a few boys that were they were having behavioural issues, and we really wanted them to get really good grades. They were able to get good grades, and they were just not focusing in class because there was one boy over there that was distracting them, and there was another boy over there that was doing this, and just looking at them and speaking to them and saying, look, guys, this is an open space, trust circle, safe space for you to talk about whatever you want to do, and we'll talk about things. And in that case, I found that when we had open and honest conversations about how we're behaving and why we're behaving in this way, and I would speak to them about hegemonic masculinity and how they needed to assert their dominance, and they're very open to learning about it. But it's really key that you have this sort of open and honest trust between them. So really work on creating really positive relationships with the boys that you're talking about or talking to in these focus groups. I mean, you can have assemblies. Assemblies are pretty good, so you can speak to a lot of people at one time. But I think the key one for me is high expectations. If boys aren't behaving in a particular way that you want them to, sanction them. Definitely sanction them, because it tells them that what the behavior that they're exhibiting right now, if whether it's a manifestation of their masculinity or feeling emasculated or something else, it's not acceptable. And then praise those ones that are doing well. If it means that you're praising a trait which is hegemonically masculine, okay, hegemonic masculinity isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time, but it's okay because they're doing the right thing, and they know, and it shows to the rest of the boys that they're doing the right thing. Also, teach high quality lessons. I think that's really key. Make sure you're teaching high quality lessons, because if boys feel like they're learning something, they're going to want to learn more. Um, Low stakes testing is definitely one as well. So if boys don't have a competition element, they can't compete with each other. They'll find a way, I'm sure. But if they don't have it open, then there can't be any sort of competition. Look, I'm bigger than you, I'm more masculine than you because I was able to get a higher score than you on a test. We don't have that competition element. If you don't have that competition element, you don't have those problems. But if on the other hand of the scale, if you find that the competition element is actually proving to be quite effective in the classroom, use it. Low stakes testing, let them show their scores. As long as it's useful and it's productive, why not? Also, education. So, again, it's all about having those open and honest conversations, teaching boys about hegemonic masculinity, telling them that they don't need to act in a certain way, they don't need to be this type of person, they don't need to be, um, uh, you know, a stoic person that doesn't speak to people. And I found that when I was teaching boys about this, is that the best way to really, really to get them to open up is to share my own experiences. So some days I walk into the classroom and say, hey guys, I'm having a bad day today, and it shows a little bit of weakness. I'm still the teacher that I am. I'm still the dominant force in the classroom because I am the teacher. But it also shows to them that even as the dominant person in the room, I am also can show weakness. I can show that I sometimes don't have the best days. It's really, really key. Anyways, thank you very much for listening to my talk. Here are the references for today for the talk. There's a bunch of references there, and I'd just like to show you another slide that I've got on further reading. and I just wanted to point out some of the really good reads that I got. So this one here by Mask Off by JJ Bowler. I mean, if you're really interested in what it means to be masculine, and how masculinity is portrayed in society today, and how what we need to do next to prevent it from becoming toxic and destructive, really have a read of JJ Bowler's JJ Bowler's book Mask Off. There's the Good Lad Initiative too. So Ben Hurst, he does a TED talk actually on what it means to be a male, and how boys aren't necessarily just boys. We teach boys to be how they are, and we need to be able to change the conversation and ensure that boys don't have an excuse to behave in a certain way. Um, Another book here, another podcast actually here is that the Reasons to Be Cheerful by Ed Miliband and Jeff Lloyd, Man Enough Promoting Positive Masculinity. It was a really really good podcast. They had a really open discussion about what it meant to be a man, how being a male is portrayed in today's media. Thanks again for listening to my talk. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.